Hi, I'm Anna Cameron, and today I'm going to conduct a series of interviews with Charles Carreon, the author of A Guide to the Practice of Visionary Religion. Charles, you're general counsel for the North American Association of Visionary Churches. So, what is visionary religion and what does your work involve?
Visionary religion is religion where people use a psychedelic substance as a sacrament in their religious practice. They may call it a ceremony. And essentially, what's happening is that a group of people are getting together based upon their faith and their mutual belief that this sacrament will provide them with a visionary experience, one that will make what all of the mystics throughout the thousands of years have been talking about, make it available to ordinary people. That is sort of the promise of visionary religion. And in my experience, it's borne out. It is a valid spiritual, religious path and deserves all the protection that religion is given in this country. And my work is to provide that protection to visionary churches and leaders who, because of their faith, actually stand in danger of prosecution for violation of the drug laws. So I don't consider my work much different from what it would have been if somebody like St. Paul had hired me to defend him when he was prosecuted by the Romans. So I have the highest respect for the people that I represent. And so I try to advise them, of course, how to stay on what we consider to be the right side of the law.
So, what kind of advice do you give them?
Well, there are a number of concerns that they have to address. And one of the first things that I try and teach people is that why the First Amendment protects visionary religion practice and how it can be that possession of, say, peyote or ayahuasca might be criminally prosecutable under one circumstance, and then if the substance is being used in a religious context, there is actually what we call a statutory defense to that under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act if the prosecution is by the federal government. And the Religious Freedom Restoration Act was actually created in order to respond to the Supreme Court's failure to appreciate that visionary religion needed to be protected under the First Amendment. Congress took that job over when the Supreme Court found that use of peyote by Native American people could be punished by the state in which they lived. And so that was how Congress addressed it. And that's basically how I address it, is I try and teach visionary church leaders how to use the law, particularly the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, in order to structure and conduct themselves and lead their churches in a way that will allow them to practice without fear of prosecution.
Wonderful. So, what kind of educational and professional experience do you have that qualifies you to advise visionary churches?
Well, my career as a lawyer began in 1986 when I graduated from UCLA Law School, which is still considered a pretty good school. And I very much enjoyed and was inspired by the great teachers that I studied with there. Ken Karst, constitutional law, had a huge influence on me. His class on equal protection, so many other fine teachers there who inspired me in the profession. I was also fortunate to work with fancy firms, big firms, Morgan, Lewis and Bockius. They did Trump's taxes, I worked for them. I work for Rabula McMurray, which merged into Ropes and Gray. They now do a lot of work for Goldman Sachs and other important robber barons. So like I say there, but for the grace of God, go I. After about 4 years in corporate practice, I joined Mazursky, Schwartz, and Angelo, where I learned how to sue large corporations and the government. And that was so much fun. I have continued throughout my life to do that. But I also took time to be an Oregon prosecutor. I prosecuted domestic violence in Jackson County. And then I was a federal public defender, which is where I got involved into representing people who were charged with drug crimes. So I know a fair bit about drug crimes, probably handled around 50 drug cases for people who were accused in federal court. During the last 8 years, I've represented the North American Association of Visionary Churches and quite a few other religious groups that are members of the Native American Association of Visionary Churches. They use various different types of sacraments. Ayahuasca is very common. Mushrooms are very common. Also, the mescaline containing cactus, San Pedro, Wachuma, also very common. So I have been able to work with these churches. I know their leaders. I've been able to speak with many of the leaders in the visionary religion movement to understand what they do. And my own religious practice, I've been a Dharma student for many years, and I've actually been inside the operation of churches that are not affiliated with psychedelics. In other words, I know how the Buddhists operate. I know how the Christians operate. I remember the Children of God when I was quite young. So I've been in a few groups that are a little different. Psychedelic churches, visionary churches are definitely different. So it fits right into my practice.
So, what is your primary message to visionary religion practitioners?
The primary message that I try to bring is that it is lawful. If you're a visionary religion practitioner, the question is for you, does the First Amendment protect my practice? And if you don't know the answer to that question, I don't think you're standing on solid psychological ground yourself. Like, why is this not unlawful? Why are you not a criminal? What's your answer? The answer is because the First Amendment protects the most deeply held moral commitments that a person holds. The Supreme Court, in a case called United States versus Seeger, made that absolutely clear because Mr. Seeger, the great folk singer, the famous guy who's often seen with Bob Dylan and Joan Baez singing for the working man, he was also a pacifist. He refused to go to, I'm pretty sure it was the Korean War. But when the draft board asked him why, they said, do you believe in God? He said, well, no. Maybe there's an intelligent universe. I'm not sure. There seem to be signs of intelligence in the universe. It's kind of a humanistic response. But they said, but do you believe in the creator, God? He says, well, I can't say that. And he says, well, but I just couldn't kill another man. I could not live with myself if I killed another man because my government told me to. I could not. And so the Supreme Court said, well, the draft board is wrong. You don't have to, quote unquote, believe in God. Pete Seeger's unwillingness to kill another man just because the government told him to is on a par. It is equal to the commitments, it said, of his friends, the Quakers, who also are conscientious objectors. And notably, the Quakers don't really have any articulated doctrine or a very fancy service. They just sit around in a circle quietly. So basically, the most bare bones belief system can nevertheless be protected under the First Amendment, doesn't need to ally itself with a creator God or some kind of philosophy. It just does need to smear clear of atheism and nihilism. You got to be careful about those. You could definitely fall outside the lines of United States versus Seeger. That case is quite solid, and that's my core message to people as I try and teach them U.S. versus Seeger, so that at a minimum that they know that the question is what's in their heart, not so much what's on their bookshelf or what kind of clothes they wear or what kind of doctrine they espouse. But that is not the end of the story. There is much more to learn.
Yeah, so it seems like that you have a framework, the 10 Commandments of Visionary Religion. And that sounds very strong. Why did you choose that name?
Well, one, it's the North American Association of Visionary Churches, so a little Christian context didn't seem out of line, but my attention is really to get the intention of the reader. And I appreciate that question because these aren't authoritarian. I came down from the mountain with grave tablets. I'm like Moses. I can now tell you how to do visionary religion. That's not what's going on here. These are rules of risk aversion that apply to visionary religion practitioners in the United States of America. I will suggest to you that if you want to drive down the road and not be pulled over by a police officer, you want to make sure you stay in your lane, drive the speed limit, signal when you're turning, don't change lanes without signaling, et cetera, et cetera. There's rules of the road, and there's rules of the road with regard to how to conduct yourself as a visionary religion practitioner in order to avoid attracting the hostile attention of law enforcement authorities. So that is why I call them commandments. I want them to have some weight. But on the other hand, as I'll try and explain as we go through them, they are not absolute rules. They are rules of risk avoidance and risk minimization. And in order to really apply them in every case, very helpful to have some legal advice, which I provide.
All right. Well, that wraps up this introductory video, and we'll see you all in the next one where Charles will introduce us to the first commandment of visionary religion.
Thank you, Anna.